is taking place on traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, Semiahmoo, and Skagit peoples, who have been protecting and celebrating life on their lands, waters, and air since time immemorial. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. This land acknowledgement is not meant to be a substitute for authentic relationship building and understanding. It's meant to introduce us to one way we can show honor and respect for tribal sovereignty and tribal self-determination. I ask that we all consider how we show up for, stand with, and take the lead from our Indigenous neighbors, recognizing that we benefit directly and indirectly from residing on colonized lands. Thank you. I'm Allison Williams, a board member with the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County, and I welcome you to this forum. The League is a 100-year-old nationwide nonpartisan organization. Our goals are to encourage informed and active participation in government, increase an understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League never endorses candidates or political parties. We have not endorsed any of the initiatives that will be discussed today. It's our goal to present balanced information about these important ballot initiatives so that you, the voters, can decide whether or not to approve them. Welcome, everyone. Now I'll pass the mic to our moderator, Laura Ridenour, for this event.
Thank you. Welcome. I am Laura Ridenour. I live in Bellingham. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a mother, a sociologist, a facilitator, a consultant to nonprofits, and a personal coach. We have some background noise. Thank you. I help people and organizations manage resources, center equity, and build capacity and practice resilience. I'm so honored to be here today. This forum on 4 initiatives on the City of Bellingham November ballot will provide equal time to the speakers on the pro and con sides of each initiative resolution. This live forum is being conducted in English and translated in Spanish, and closed captioning is available for those who are in need of that. It's being recorded and broadcast on BTV Bellingham. The recording and transcripts in English will be available on demand at the City of Bellingham's YouTube channel and on the League of Women Voters website. The recording of the Spanish interpretation will be available on the League website. So, welcome everyone watching live and tuning in for this special initiative. Here's the slide is showing our approximate schedule for today, and it's plus or minus 5 minutes as we go along. I welcome you all, speakers for and against, and hoping that we will all better understand the proposed policies. I want to make 3 points and 1 observation before we get started. Public engagement in discussion and debate is an essential element of making good public policy. What is good public policy? One definition is seeking to define issues and implement strategies to produce a measurable and positive result for the general public. 2, at all levels of government, policy impact analysis. I want to point this out that we're at the phase of policy impact analysis. So input from the sectors and communities likely to be impacted by the proposed policy is critical for legislative participation and informed decision-making by the voter, be they citizens or elected officials. And 3, my last point is our collective experience and contributions in these virtual spaces and any forums on initiatives are important for continued functional democracy. My observation is that our current culture of individuality and necessary distance from each other have made it even more important that we offer respect for the policy analysis part of the process. And so I ask you all to hold compassion, not sides, and hold space for kindness, listening first to understand, and for the opportunity to learn together about what works for good policymaking. That is the purpose of this event. So the ground rules for this event are our community agreements while we're all together. So they are listen first to understand, respect each other's perspectives and experiences, and ask clear questions. On that note, if you're watching the recording, you can follow up with the sponsors of the initiative with your specific questions later. So how each forum will be conducted, and we have 4 initiatives today to talk about. The pro side will speak first for the opening and closing statement, and each side will have 2 minutes to begin the discussion with an opening statement. Both sides will be asked to respond to questions from the moderator, aimed to help voters understand the issues behind each measure and the impact of passing the initiative. Speakers will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to questions. To help you track your time, the speakers will have a timer counter that's on the screen. So it's counting down, and it will turn yellow when 15 seconds remain. When it turns red, time is up, and we ask the panelists be respectful of the time allotted. Each side will have an opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement as well. Each initiative session will be bookended by the information about how to vote and the location of the ballot box. Live viewers on Zoom, thanks for being here, may put questions to the panelists regarding each initiative resolution in the Q&A chat box found along the bottom of your screen. From these, a selection of questions will be asked at the end of each initiative discussion. So we're going to get started. Initiative number 1, 2021, expands tenant rights to include rental reallocation assistance. This measure would require landlords to provide written notice 90 days before terminating a rental agreement without cause, or increasing rent by more than 5% in a rolling 12-month period. It will also require landlords to pay rental reallocation assistance equal to 3 months of the current fair market rate rent in Bellingham when terminating a
Recording stopped.
without cause, or increasing rent more than 8%, if requested by tenant with limited exceptions, and authorize private party civil enforcement actions. So, welcome speakers for and against. We have Sage Jones and Maya Morales, I believe. Both of you are here. Are both of you going to speak today?
Hi, I believe I will be speaking in favor of Initiative 1 and Maya will be on Initiative 2.
Okay, thank you very much. So Sage Jones' background is a Bellingham renter whose community work focuses on municipalism. I didn't practice that word in advance. Housing and relational organizing with the Whatcom Democratic Socialists of America. We have no speaker for this initiative. Sage will offer an opening statement, and I wanted to mention that the League reached out to the committee lead and members who drafted the statement for the voter pamphlet for their help with identifying speakers in opposition, as well as others who may have been willing to speak. And as of yesterday, we hadn't heard back from anyone. So Sage will start with a pro statement and responding to the following question. From your perspective, what are 3 important considerations for voters in deciding how to vote on this proposition?
Should I start with the question or my opening statement?
In your opening statement, you can address the question if you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Ready when y'all are. Oh, we're going. Okay. So Initiative 1 would expand tenant rights by providing more notice for rental increases above 5% and renter relocation assistance for no-cause evictions or rental increases above 8%. Most of the language for this initiative was borrowed from relocation assistance legislation that was passed by Portland City Council in 2017. So renter relocation assistance in Portland for 4 years now. Last week, Seattle City Council voted for renter relocation assistance with 6 months notice as opposed to our 90 days notice, and relocation assistance that is the same as ours, equivalent to 3 months rent. We hope Bellingham will join Portland and Seattle to protect renters. We believe renters should be able to put down roots in our neighborhoods, and that renter relocation assistance would help stabilize our community by keeping tenants in their homes. Initiative 1 has reasonable exemptions to protect landlords, including exempting landlords who live on the same property as their tenant, temporarily rent out their house for less than 3 years, or for active military service, certain affordable housing exemptions, if somebody rents out their house before selling it temporarily, and many more exemptions as well. This initiative does not offer renter relocation assistance to tenants that break the terms of their lease. It simply helps keep good neighbors in their homes by discouraging the outrageous 25, 30, 35% rent hikes that we're seeing in Bellingham right now, or offering assistance to renters who are economically evicted by those massive rent hikes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I was just receiving a chat from somebody asking to make the con statement for the 1 minute that we have. I will read a portion of the con statement and see if that works. The league reached, so the argument against is that for renters as a form of rent control, this initiative motivates the landlords to establish policies damaging to our community. Landlords will increase application standards, making housing less accessible for average people. Despite efforts to stabilize rent prices, rent control has historically raised rents. In fact, the most expensive cities in the country use rent control policies. And the initiative has no plan to solve this main problem, a housing shortage. Rent control has even been proven to lower housing supply. For retirees and minorities, retirees and ethnic minorities are statistically more likely than others to own small rental properties. This initiative hurts the ability of entrepreneurial people who use rents to meet their financial needs, and it unfairly targets groups in our community. I want to take a pause for a moment to see if Judy wants to make a statement. I apologize for putting you on the spot, Judy. I made a mistake in the question that you were asking, and so I will continue to read the last of the con statement, and then we will move on to the general questions. A substantial body of research for homeowners proves rent control hurts home values. This policy not only increases our rents, but reduces home prices. Decreases in property values harm our schools and other vital civic resources depending on property taxes. So that was the argument for against that's in the voter pamphlet. Here are the general questions that are asked of all speakers on each initiative. Who in our community would be helped if this legislation passes? And so I will go back to you, Sage, to answer that question, and you have 1.5 minutes.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'm just going to start with a clarifying statement. So relocation assistance is not the same as rent control, and this is an issue that's been taken to court in Oregon multiple times, and has held up that relocation assistance is different from rent control. So I believe that relocation assistance and increased notice would help everyone in our community, especially the 54% of Bellingham that rents, but also everyone who cares about renters staying in their neighborhoods. You know, when you have a good neighbor, you want them to stay there for as long as they want to rent. And oftentimes people get priced out, or they don't have time to budget for renter increases. So Initiative 1 just offers a choice. So tenants can stay and not receive relocation assistance if their rent goes up more than 8% and they really want to stay in their home. Like, say their house is really affordable, it goes up, they can still afford to stay there. The landlord doesn't have to pay relocation assistance, and the tenant can stay in that home. So it really just helps keep people housed, and provides a safety net for when they're displaced.
Thank you. And the next question is, who will be harmed by passing this legislation?
I think that landlords who there's a perception from landlords that they'll be harmed if, if they want to increase rent by, I think, unreasonable amounts, like whose income goes up more than 8% per year, really. So I think there's always going to be talking points that landlords are harmed by this initiative, but I think that this is just a fair regulation to, keep our community housed, and housing is a human right.
Thank you. If this legislation fails to pass, what will be the outcome?
I think we're seeing the outcome of this right now. Like, I don't know if anybody read the Herald article that came out earlier this year on somebody's rent going up by, I think, 33%. So as the eviction moratorium is raised, people are making up their back rents, but also good tenants are having their rent raised to, make up for lost profits. So everyone is facing rent hikes that, they can't afford. And I'm worried about how much that will continue. And we'll see more and more of that as the pandemic continues. So I think renters who rent in Bellingham should, vote in favor of this, as well as sympathetic homeowners.
Thank you. I wanted to mention, just for clarification, that I was reading the con statement because the league had reached out to many members who drafted the statement in the voter pamphlet on the pro and the against, and we did not hear anybody willing to speak. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear. So here are the general questions that are asked of all speakers on each initiative. Who in our community will be helped if this legislation passes? Excuse me, that was the same general question. The community. The next question is, each of these initiatives are dealing with complex and challenging issues facing our community. Describe how you collaborated with community partners to either craft the initiatives or craft the responses to the initiatives in order to understand the impact of this community.
Yeah, thank you. This was a grassroots effort from the beginning. I would say about 10 to 15 community members came together who have experience in, for this one, housing organizing. And it was also sent to other community members with legal expertise and policy expertise. I don't know exactly how many people's eyes were put on this initiative before it was submitted to the city, but it was many. And let's see, describe. We spent the last 6 months, collaborating with community members and discussing it with them, especially during the initiative signature gathering phase of the campaign. We talked to many landlords, some of which were very supportive. My landlord actually signed Initiative 1. And, we tried to understand where they were coming from and tell them about the exemptions, which really helped people feel more at ease. It seems like the people that were most viscerally upset by this were the ones that thought that they couldn't kick out or remove problem tenants that live on the same property as them, because that's just an uncomfortable living situation. And when we told them about that exemption, it made a lot of people feel better about how the initiative was written.
Thank you. So we have a few questions from the Zoom chat, and also people were able to submit questions in advance via the league website. And the league has also come up with a few general questions. And so our Allison Williams is going to feed to me a few questions that have been consolidated from those three sources. Allison, I'm going to start with thank you. The ones that are already planned right now, we have two. So What other actions do you propose to address the needs for more affordable renters if this measure fails to pass, or whether or not this measure is approved?
Oh, I'm so happy with this question. Yeah, so this is not a one stop solution on the housing crisis. We know that this is just one part of many things that need to happen to make housing affordable in Bellingham. More housing needs to be built. We need to increase our supply. We need, smart density. And I think a really neat way to protect affordable housing would be to pass tenants' first right of refusal. And what that would mean is that tenants would have the first opportunity to buy a piece of property when their landlords put it up for sale. And yeah, I don't want to take too much, liberty with the organization that I represent, so I won't go into other policy proposals right now. But there's tons of things that we can do to increase affordable housing, and I'd love to work with more community partners going forward. I think that all of our coalition partners at People First Bellingham would be thrilled for this initiative process to really spark like a increase in creating policy around these issues.
Thank you. What challenges do you foresee in implementing the legislation to expand tenant rights?
Let's see what. I think that some voices are louder than others in our community, and I think that could impact our ability to pass future legislation. I think that some, special interests have personal relationships, and that affects the policy that we see that's passed in Bellingham. I also think that City Council doesn't have enough resources to really focus on policy creation. Unlike some bigger cities, they don't have their own policy staffers, and it's a part-time position. So as Bellingham grows, maybe we need to see City Council with more resources to craft enough policy to really account for the growth that we're seeing in Bellingham.
Great, thank you. I have two more questions, and I think we have enough time for those. What has the experience been in Portland that you mentioned during the years its similar ordinance has been in effect?
Yeah, so I've only talked to housing organizers about this, so I don't have any statistical data that I can back up on this initiative. But when I talked to housing organizers at Portland Tenants United, they mentioned that the average rental increase rate has gone down from, it started at 12 to 13% per year, and it's decreased to 2 to 3% per year. So when you really cut out those outliers, those huge rent hikes that people see, which are often just a way to economically evict a tenant, then you see the average rent increase really go down. So PTU thinks it's I don't know, the most impactful piece of legislation that Portland City Council has passed to protect renters, and they're incredible advocates for their renter relocation assistance, which they lovingly call RELO down in Portland.
What percentage of Bellingham's rental units will these requirements apply to?
It'll apply to, I don't have an exact percentage, but it'll apply to every unit that doesn't fit those reasonable exemptions. So it'll apply to the vast majority of rental units in Bellingham, as it should. Someone who rents from a small landlord has the same bills to pay as somebody that rents from a large property management company. So we really didn't want to leave anyone out of this initiative outside of those reasonable exemptions.
Thank you. So I'd like to invite you to make a closing statement of not more than 1 minute.
Great. So 54% of our community, myself included, rents in Bellingham. Everyone knows we're in a housing crisis. You can look around on the street and see that we're in a housing crisis. You can talk to any of your neighbors or kids that rent in Bellingham and know how hard it is. I'm lucky enough to have a landlord that signed our initiatives, but I've lived in places where I'm afraid to ask for repairs too close to lease re-signing because I don't want them to think I'm a difficult tenant or raise my rent because of it. Where my housing was affordable, I still had a pit in my stomach every August because I didn't know if that was the year I was going to get priced out. And when we were gathering signatures for this campaign, we heard countless stories like this of people being completely priced out of Bellingham because of rent increases. We hear of the steep rent hikes, and we hear of people having difficulty finding housing when they are priced out. It's such a tight market right now, and it's just incredibly hard to find housing in the current 60-day notice window. Relocation assistance alone won't solve our housing crisis, but it's a substantial place to start with a proven track record of success in Portland. And in our state, Seattle just passed relocation assistance, and I think we should join them in voting for it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your voice here. I wanted to remind people that the statement in the pamphlet outlines some of the potential con perspectives on this voter initiative. Hello, welcome back. We are doing the forum on the 4 initiatives of the City of Bellingham November ballot. We're providing equal time to speakers on the pro and con sides of each resolution. I invite everyone here on live Zoom to put a question into the chat if you have one as we go, in the Q&A box. Okay, I was going to say this live forum is being conducted in English and translated in Spanish, and closed captioning is available. I'm your moderator for this event, Laura Ridenauer. I am a Bellingham resident, a sociologist, a nonprofit consultant, and personal coach, and I'm honored to be here with you. We now welcome speakers on Initiative 2021-02 concerning the use of facial recognition technology and predictive policing technology. So here's the ground rules for this event and our community agreements. While we're all together, we will listen first to understand, respect each other's perspectives and experiences, ask clear questions. And on that note, if you're watching the recording and have questions, please follow up with the sponsors of the initiative with your questions. Here's how this portion of the forum will be conducted. The pro side will speak first for the opening and closing statement. Each side will have 2 minutes to begin the discussion with an opening statement. Both sides will be asked to respond to questions aimed to help voters understand the issues behind each measure and the impact of passing the initiative. Speakers will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to questions. To help you track your time, there is a timer counter. It shows as purple when it's counting down, and it will turn yellow when your 15 seconds remain. Speakers, you must turn on the timer on your own. When it turns red, time is up. We ask that panelists will be respectful of the time allocated, and I will interrupt you if we end up going over. Each side will have an opportunity to make 1 minute closing statement. I have a little bit of wiggle room on that. So if you end up with 15 seconds extra, that's okay. Live viewers on Zoom may put questions for the panelists regarding each initiative resolution in the Q&A chat box found along the bottom of your screen. Follow along from these, a selection of questions will be asked at the end. So now we begin the discussion about initiative resolution number 2. Welcome citizens representing the for and against perspectives. Today we have Phyllis McGee and Sean Brogan, Maya Morales, and Jennifer Lee. Maya uses pronouns she, they, an artist, an educator, and organizer, and a volunteer with People First Bellingham. She holds an undergraduate degree in gender studies and art, as well as a master's in education with a focus on teaching English to speakers of other languages, TESOL. And also with Maya is Jennifer Lee, the Technology and Liberty Manager at the ACLU of Washington, where she leads ACLU Washington's work creating, advocating, implementing community-focused policies at the intersection of technology and civil liberties. She is working to advance legislation to protect people's privacy and regulate powerful surveillance and AI-based technologies. And on the con side, oh, Phyllis, I apologize. I did not get a bio for you into my notes here, and I would welcome you to introduce yourself when we get started. Sean Brogan is a concerned citizen and has been a resident of Bellingham for 15 years with his family and his work as a flight attendant. Bellingham is a place he calls home and where he recreates, workshops, and has community gatherings. So welcome, speakers. The City of Bellingham Initiative number 2, I'm going to read the description. Concerns the use of facial recognition technology and predictive policing technology. This measure would prohibit the city from acquiring or using facial recognition technology, prohibit the city from contracting with a third party to use facial recognition technology on its behalf, prohibit the use of predictive policing technology, prohibit the retention of unlawfully acquired data, prohibit the use of data, information, or evidence derived from the use of facial recognition technology or predictive policing technology in any legal proceeding, and authorize private civil enforcement actions. Speakers, we will begin this discussion with this question, with each speaker having 2 minutes. This is your opening statement, and also we ask that you address this question in your opening statement. From your perspective, what are 3 important considerations for voters in deciding how to vote on this proposition? And so we'll begin with the pro statement. Thank you.
Thank you. People First Bellingham has brought forward Initiative 2 out of concern for the very real and immediate threat, risk, and harm facial recognition and predictive policing tools cause to the Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, and LGBT, immigrant, and targeted members of our community, and out of concern for the broader implications of the use of these technologies.
We support a ban on facial recognition technology and predictive policing tools because they fuel racial injustice and present an unprecedented threat for our privacy and civil liberties, whether or not they operate accurately. Facial recognition gives governments, it gives companies and individuals the power to spy on us wherever we go, enabling the persistent tracking of our faces at protests, at political rallies, places of worship, and more, chilling our democratic rights. After all, we can't leave our faces at home. And critically, use of facial recognition tech exacerbates the already disproportionate surveillance and criminalization of marginalized communities. In this past year alone, we learned of at least 3 Black men who were wrongfully arrested and jailed because facial recognition software matched them to crimes they did not commit. Like face recognition, predictive policing tools further entrench systemic racism in a self-replicating cycle because predictive policing tools use massive amounts of historical crime data to forecast where future criminal activity will take place. They are more accurate at predicting biased policing rather than predicting actual crime.
Currently, there's little to no transparency with the public on exact algorithms and elements contained in the predictive technologies that law enforcement agencies can use. Companies can draw from all kinds of sources to build their software, including scraping pictures and data from people's Facebook profiles, blogs, you name it. We need to pass Initiative 2 and protect our community's rights and liberties.
Excuse me, I was muted. Thank you so much. And now I welcome the con statement.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was muted up until now, and then video off. Am I on? Good.
You're on, Phyllis.
Phyllis McKee. Yeah.
And don't,
Thank you.
a moment to introduce yourself. I apologize for not having your bio.
Yeah, I sent my bio in, and I was told yesterday you had it. I'm a resident of Bellingham, have lived here when I went to Western, and then I've been back here living full-time since 1996. And I've been on the Planning Commission for the City of Bellingham and the Alumni Board for Western and the Parking Commission for the City of Bellingham. But anyway, speaking against this particular initiative, I think there's a lot of underlying language here that brings on consequences that we haven't really anticipated. It all comes under the heading of facial recognition and then predictive technology. But to me, the third prong, the one about what I call it a get out of jail free card, is allows people to discriminate against the kind of technology that's been used to gather the information. And just to make a comment on the three prongs, which I see this as a three-prong issue, and that is the facial recognition, the use of technology, and that if any technology has been used in discovery, then that can be considered an injury, and it is removed from any due process that a person is going through. And even if they may be guilty, the word term injury does not mean physical injury or any other kind of injury other than legal. And this means that they could have easily been guilty, but that the amount of technology used to discern that has then the whole chain of evidence can be eliminated. And I have some issues with that. And contrary to common belief, predictive technology is not used here in the city of Bellingham with facial recognition. And it also does not identify individuals. What it identifies is trends, like where in the city might certain burglaries or intrusions may have occurred. And it doesn't identify the people. Now, I can understand that if somebody with dark skin may be more difficult than somebody with light skin, I understand that. But there are so many other backup and redundancies as far as involving exploring criminalization, that I wouldn't fear this, and it assumes that we're closing the door.
Thank you. Our next questions, we have 3 general questions for you, each with 1.5 minute responses. So we'll begin with the pro side and then the con side, and then I'll ask the next question. So the first question is, who in our community will be helped if this legislation passes? And you on the pro side gets to choose who gets to answer this question. You'll have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. So I'll answer this one. Bellingham is a community of neighborhoods divided by access. Access to good food nearby, access to the workings of city government, and access to the resources and leverage needed to pass laws and create real changes in the way our city works. Our team of visionary volunteers have worked so hard to gather thousands of signatures and put this on our ballot. Because this initiative, along with the other 3 that we've put on the ballot, protects all of us, but especially our community members most vulnerable to the invasive overreaches of law enforcement, the Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, and LGBT, immigrant members of our community, as well as local activists, organizers, and journalists. Enacting a ban on the use of technologies that are more adept at illuminating biased patterns in policing than in preventing crime will not only help protect the folks in our city with the least amount of access to institutional power, it will create space for folks to thrive. No one thrives under constant surveillance, and we want everyone in Bellingham to have the space and the privacy that they need to grow and learn and thrive.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now on the con side, please. Who in our community will be helped if this legislation passes? Sean, are you going to answer this question? It looks like he's needing to get some space to be able to answer this question. The timer will be starting.
Yes, I'd say that it would help who be helped more in this community, I would say would be criminals. This initiative is not straightforward, adds a lot of interpretation, so it would help those that would be inclined to commit crimes. Also, the Bellingham City Council has unanimously passed the resolution.
Okay, we cannot hear Sean. Phyllis, do you want to take over?
I'm back on.
Okay, we cannot see you, but we can hear you. You have 1 minute and 20 seconds left. Excuse me, the timer just changed to 56. Can I get a clarification?
Yeah, I stopped the timing when he disappeared and I can only restart one or the other option. So shall I start with 1.5 minutes or 1 minute?
Let's start with 1.5 minutes, please. I apologize
Alrighty.
for all of this. Sean, are you steady? Here we go.
Okay, my last comment is the Bellingham City Council has unanimously passed a resolution urging residents to vote no on this initiative, and that's all I have for that question.
Okay, thank you. And so our next question is, excuse me, who will be harmed by passing this legislation? And we start with the pro side. You'll have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. The opposing side, arguing for use of invasive policing technologies, wants these technologies to sound non-threatening, yet no solid data actually supports that stance. Analysis of facial recognition tools and predictive policing programs have found them to be ineffective, expensive, and incredibly harmful to marginalized communities. Time-tested methods will solve actual crime, not facial recognition and predictive policing technology that encourages bias, abusive, and predatory tactics while sidestepping human accountability. Crime forecasting completely contradicts US law, innocent until proven guilty. Predicting criminality on the basis of past policing practices is exactly what drives bias policing today.
Thank you. And Phyllis or Sean, who's taking the lead on this, please? Who will be harmed by passing this legislation?
I am the unintended consequences would bring harm to innocent citizens of Bellingham, personal and private property. Not only the police won't be able to bring criminals to justice, there won't be any resolve to victims due to the accused guilty being set free. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last question, the general question is, if this legislation fails to pass, what will be the outcome? Starting with Jennifer or Maya.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So facial recognition and predictive policing tools are biased, inaccurate, and lead to life or death encounters with law enforcement. It is virtually impossible for the public to know or understand what information goes in or out of these tools. And Bellingham Police Department has claimed not to have used facial recognition software specifically, but it has acknowledged using predictive policing software. It is unclear to us at this time whether facial recognition is an aspect or component of that software or not. Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, and LGBT and immigrant members of our community, local activists, organizers, and journalists are all at risk if we do not enact a ban on these invasive technologies. Clearview has continued to collect data and build ever scarier and creepier tools. There are many lawsuits against that company and others. If we don't act now, we may well lose our chance to rein in the civil rights violating practices that are inherent to this kind of tech being employed against us in our daily lives. So this is for targeted communities, but it's for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. And the con side, if this legislation fails to pass, what will be the outcome?
Well, the outcome would be the status quo that we have right now, but I'd like to just interject that the techniques that we have for DNA and other forensic testing and detective work have been fine-tuned and tried over several years. And I wouldn't want to throw out any technology that can be specified and actually worked in team with other techniques that we have already available, because to throw it out before we've ever had any chance or opportunity to use it seems to be a little bit short-sighted. But I still think that having anything that's predictive is not to the person. It's usually to location, what's going on, where's going on, what neighborhood, and how we can then send resources to those areas that are in need and fine tune that. Sean, do you have any comment you'd like to make beyond that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we have questions from the Zoom participants have been collected by Allison, our league representative, and anybody who submitted a question about the initiative via the league website. And we have time for 3 to 4 questions. The first question is, the initiative is dealing with complex and challenging issues facing our community. Describe how you collaborated with community partners to either craft the initiative or craft the response to the initiative in order to understand the impact to the community. And we'll start with the pro side, please.
Yeah, this initiative was brought, as we've said, by a group of local activists, organizers, students, professionals, a whole coalition of folks who really saw this as a threat in our community and as a real need to address. It's forward-looking, it's visionary, and the goal is to really think ahead and make sure that we're securing solid rights and liberties in our community that do not violate people's both everyday lives and going about them, and also long-standing rights, and also rights in terms of the law. I want to just note that in terms of the way that these technologies are employed, they don't just help send people to neighborhoods. The data goes into the software and comes out based on what goes in. So that means that the same neighborhoods get targeted again and again and again. And so what we see there is that it just further entrenches systemic racism and bias in our communities. So I think that's really important to address, and that's what the creators of this initiative are trying to address.
Thank you. And on the con side, on the concern of the use of facial recognition technology and predictive policing technology, this initiative is dealing with complex and challenging issues facing our community. Please describe how you collaborated with community partners to either craft your response to the initiatives or in order to understand the impact to the community.
Yes, we met with detectives, police officers from the city of Bellingham, and they pointed out that these tools are used in conjunction with other tools that are already proven and used frequently, DNA testing, any kind of other forensics that we take for granted. But the question also came up with what happens to our surveillance cameras, and we see those in banks, airports, and we expect to see that in there for the public safety. But if we eliminate anything to do with facial recognition, what does that do to any kind of surveillance cameras or any kind of surveillance utensils? So I would really wonder what the other side has to say about that. Can I ask the question? No?
We don't have a way for us to go back and forth with that discussion because it ends up being perhaps unbalanced. So I am the moderator asking the questions.
Okay. Well, it seemed to be sort of one-sided. It makes assumptions that these things are going to be used draconially, but it doesn't really show that the other tools in conjunction with this particular facial recognition is all what's behind any cameras and surveillance materials that we have and technique that we rely upon now. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with those things. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is, what data exists about whether or not facial recognition usage in law enforcement is helpful in lowering crime rates? And starting with the pro side, please.
I'm going to quickly just answer Phyllis's question. I'm going to pass the mic to Jennifer after that to answer this one. Phyllis, in terms of surveillance cameras and regular forms of surveillance that are already used that do not include facial recognition, those don't go away. So time-tested methods do remain. Traditional use of a camera and then reviewing footage is still able to be used. I'll pass off to Jen.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks, Laura. So the potential dangers inherent in government use of this technology are immense, and use of these systems is just not worth the risk. Allowing for creation of a surveillance database with all the expected risks of abuse cannot be justified by the unproven potential to provide very limited benefits. While we know that face recognition harms our democracy regardless of its inaccuracy, it's important to note that this technology is rife with race and gender biases. Multiple studies have found that the technology is up to 100 times more likely to misidentify Black or Asian faces compared with white faces. Black women in particular are misidentified at significantly higher rates, and this technology is even less reliable at identifying transgender people and entirely inaccurate when used on non-binary people. We know of at least 3 Black men who have been wrongfully arrested due to a false recognition match. So this technology is just not worth the risk. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, the initiative asks voters of Bellingham to ban some technologies and asks the voters to say yes or no. How can we make it perfectly clear what a yes vote means and what a no vote means? Oh, excuse me, I forgot to pass back to the con side. So I'm going to repeat the question of the pro side for you to answer. What data exists about whether or not facial recognition usage in law enforcement is helpful in lowering crime rates?
Well, the question I have is, I'm not sure when the con side speaks to that, but what's the pro side? I never got from the information that I read that these things were other than estimates. Like three Black men were misdiagnosed as being criminal activity, but 3 out of how many? 30, 300, 3,000. A lot of the information was not there. It was hard to get a real handle on some of the things that the innuendo that was being stated. And again, I can see where dark-skinned people, but I'm not sure about some of the other demographics that they would be able to identify with facial recognition. LGBTQ, for example, I don't think would show up in facial recognition. So I'm wondering what the concern would be, and we're making assumptions that when the pro side says these things that they're absolutes, but I haven't found anything that really truly supports that. And I was delighted when the city council decided that this was not a good action and voted against it. And I would encourage other people to do the same thing, just because it's too open-ended. Now, I'm not closing the door to any kind of discussion. I'm just saying that what we need to look at is, how do we team this with already existing technology? And how do we really find out what techniques are problematic, and how do we fine tune and correct those? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. The initiative asks voters the city of Bellingham should ban some technologies and asks voters to say yes or no. How can we make it perfectly clear what a yes vote means and what a no vote means? And we'll start with the pro side. Thank you.
Yeah, so a yes vote to this initiative means that Bellingham voters will be banning the use of this invasive policing technology by the city. It does not mean that other federal or state agencies cannot use them, but it does mean that the city of Bellingham cannot. I'd love to see if Jen has other points to add to that.
Thanks, Maya. Voting yes on this initiative means that the city of Bellingham would be presenting what are known inaccuracies that are racial and gender-based in nature. We know that as I had just stated, we know that this technology is up to 100 times more likely to misidentify people of color compared with white people. And the 3 Black men that I referenced are just a few that we know of. There are so many others who are likely to be misidentified by use of this technology and are likely to have life or death encounters with law enforcement. That's just not worth the risk. Voting yes on Initiative 2 means that you will be making the city of Bellingham a safer place for everyone, protecting everyone's privacy and civil liberties.
Thank you. And the con side, please.
Yes, particularly the identification is assumed to be negative to various minority groups, but also it can vindicate people. And I think we're missing that other backside of this technology, is that it doesn't have to always be an error to the negative. It can be, oftentimes eyewitnesses are very unreliable where technology can come in and aid. And this, like I say, again, this is done with various other DNA, other forensics. So it's not a standalone thing. And I think that just to paint it with a dark brush and say it's going to be negative and it's going to identify the wrong people is not the case. It can also vindicate people. And I'd look at this as just one of multiple tools that would be there for the police to be able to use, or anybody else who's doing investigation. And I would encourage us not to close the door on this. And I don't think it would be ever clear. We get into semantics on these things, and it is never totally clear on something as vague as this. And like I say, these 3 things should not be in one vote, yes or no, up or down. And at the very least, they should have been brought forward as individual initiatives, not as a cluster. Thanks.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about facial recognition technology. Can you please help us define what predictive policing technology means? What other technology is included? And starting again with the pro side, please.
Yeah, so I'll just start us off quickly. Oh, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Good. Do you mind restarting that? I'm so sorry. I thought I was muted.
There's a request. Thank you, timer.
Thanks. So in terms of what's included in predictive policing software, there is not a lot of transparency, and so it's hard to get accurate details. What we do know is that there is a ton of data, a lot of it collected in pretty sketchy ways. Some of it's scraped off the web, off people's public profiles. Clearview is known for scraping millions and millions upon millions of faces off of the web without any kind of authorization to do that. But because these are done, this is done by private companies and then fed into the software, law enforcement is able to use it. Jen, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Thanks, Maya. I would say that predictive policing tools are, to just describe it very generally, they are computer systems that analyze large sets of data, specifically historical crime data, to help decide where to deploy police or identify individuals who are supposedly more likely to commit a crime or be a victim. So these systems seek to forecast crime even before it happens, undermining our Fourth Amendment right against reasonable searches and seizures by the police. And even though these tools are inaccurate and biased, they make it easier for the police to claim that individuals meet the reasonable suspicion standard. So it threatens our constitutional rights and it threatens our democracy.
Thank you. So on the against side, can you please define what predictive technology means and what other technology is included? And I understand that this might not actually, as soon as I say this question, I'm not sure if it's appropriate to say to both sides, but you have some time if you like.
Thank you. Yes, yes. Well, for one thing, when we had conversations with people who are investigating crimes and that's their job, said it has not to do with people, but where, when, and what. And so location in a city, if there's a high crime rate that's starting up, and targeting areas that, but this is not identifying people. So there's a lot of the discussion that we're getting here on the pro side is it's wrongly identifying people. And that's not what I got from speaking with officers who look at predictive technology. And they look at being able to mathematically put together an assessment of location and what and where and what might happen next and how they can fine tune limited resources. But it's not like identifying particular people. There was nobody who said that that's what predictive technology was all about. So I'm a little confused about the conflict of definition here. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have a question that has come in from the audience listening. In your view, would the use of technology described make our law enforcement biased? And you have 1.5 minutes, and this goes to the pro side first, please.
Oh, wow. Thanks for that question. I do not think it would make our law enforcement biased. I think it would reinforce what is already existing. There is a ton of data out there. I think everyone has watched as the entire country mourned the murder of George Floyd. I think we are all well aware of the bias in policing. So I don't think that this brings particularly new bias. I think it really further entrenches existing bias. Since we have a little extra time, I'm just going to go ahead and address a couple of points brought up in some of the other answers to questions. These surveillance tools in the form of predictive policing do not neutrally target a place. They target the locations of people in those places. A random building isn't a target for figuring out what's located there. We know it's there. It's the people who are there that are surveilled. And so predictive policing software seeks to track the movements of individuals in those locations and can do so with very high accuracy. And so that is where the bias can come in, because we know that targeted individuals who are being tracked are then at risk for being targets of law enforcement actions. So I wanted to clarify that a little bit.
Thank you. And would you like to answer this question, Sean or Phyllis? The question is, in your view, would the use of technology described make our law enforcement biased?
Well, bias is a kind of a loaded word. I mean, biased would mean, are you leaning in one direction or another? And if you have data that's suggesting that you look in one particular place, or if there's certain individuals that are there, and also the way that we're discussing it right now, it's almost as though the person who's being targeted is victimized, where they may indeed be a guilty party. And so finding out where those people are, if that's considered bias, that's just because they've narrowed the field down on who they're looking for and where and when. But the police officers we talked with did not highlight individuals. They talked about getting data on where, when, and what, and predicting where then they would focus their attention on those areas for being there, checking out, and so on. But like I say, the assumption then is that these poor innocent people are being targeted is not necessarily the case. Maybe that's exactly where we want to be and what we want to be doing. So, I mean, I think we're getting caught up in semantics here about profiling and targeting, when it's, are they guilty? If they are, then we should be heading in those directions. But bias to me is without guilt, and the poor innocent people are being charged. And I don't think that's the case of what we're talking about, really.
Thank you. So I'd like to invite each of you, each side on this initiative, to make a closing statement. Each of you will present closing statements of not more than 2 minutes each. And starting with the pro side, please.
Oh, sorry, it's Jen that needs to start this.
Okay.
Thank you. People First Bellingham and the ACLU of Washington strongly urge Bellingham voters to join a growing number of cities, states, and countries in recognizing that these technologies just don't serve the public interest. At least 22 jurisdictions, including King County, Washington, Portland, Boston, and New Orleans have enacted facial recognition bans. And just this month, the European Union actually voted to ban all forms of predictive policing and face recognition technology.
If you believe in equity, if you believe that everyone has a basic right to privacy and that nobody should be profiled or arrested for any crime that they have not committed, you need to vote yes to ban these invasive rights evading technologies. Sorry, am I out of time?
No, I messed up on the timing. Just go ahead.
Oh, okay. The safety of immigrants, Black and Indigenous, and people of color, queer, LGBT, and other targeted folks are counting on us voters to come together and use our voices at the ballot box. Bellingham is for everyone, and we need to ban this tech washing of the racist, classist, and biased profiling of our most vulnerable community members. And just to clarify, tech washing basically means sort of covering one's racism and classism with technology and using that as sort of a cover for it. So just so folks realize, I think everyone should vote yes on Initiative 2. Thanks.
Thank you.
And since I went over with that, I think.
Oh, Judy, we can't hear you. Are you
I'll go ahead and set the timer for 2 minutes on the other side since that got messed up, okay?
Sounds good. Phyllis and Sean, would you like to make a closing statement on the con side of this initiative?
Yes. This initiative is about change. It is not about improvement. It's about seriously limiting the Bellingham Police Department. There is nothing in this initiative to help the community, only restricts the capability of the police department from doing its job. Washington State currently has a statute which requires, among other things, human review of matches, training for personnel using FRT, and requiring a warrant to conduct real-time surveillance. In our opinion, FRT, predictive policing, and other technologies are not going away. What the initiative should have given to the citizens of Bellingham are recommendations to the city and the police department, such as inform the public on how and when FRT is used and how it is collected and stored, quickly establish parameters to engender public confidence, prohibit any use of technology that would violate an individual's rights under the First and Fourth Amendments. Therefore, our recommendation is vote no on this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate all your perspectives and experience that you bring to this discussion. We will take a moment to bring on the next round of speakers and be right back with Initiative 3 Forum. This initiative number 3 is concerns to recipients using city's funds to discourage unionization efforts. I'm Laura Weidnauer, the moderator for this forum. Here's how the initiative resolution will be conducted. Here's how the forum on this initiative resolution will be conducted. Our community agreements are that while we're all together, we listen first to understand, we respect each other's perspectives and experiences, and ask clear questions. On that note, if you're watching the recording, follow up with the sponsors of the initiative with your questions, please. So how this will go is the pro side will speak first on the opening and closing statement. Each side will have 2 minutes to begin the discussion with an opening statement. Both sides will be asked to respond to questions aimed to help voters understand the issues behind each measure and the impact of passing the initiative. Speakers will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to the questions. To help track time, there's a timer counter that will show purple as it's counting down and will turn yellow when 15 seconds remain. When it turns red, time is up. We ask that the panelists are respectful of the time allocated. Each side will have an opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement. The public chat feature is turned off for attendees on the Zoom event, but those of you who are joining us live can type questions into the Q&A box and they will be asked during the community questions section. A selection of questions will be asked and consolidated. So now we begin the discussion about initiative resolution number 3. Welcome citizens representing the for and against perspectives on the initiative concerning the recipient's use of city funds to discourage unionization efforts. I welcome Betsy Pernato and Dan Dunn. And a little bit about the two of them. Betsy Pernato is a retired union member and delegate to the Northwest Washington Central Labor Council for the Retired Public Employees Council, Chapter 7. She has worked for 30 years to support economic justice and the rights of workers to form unions, bargain collectively, and strike, first through the Whatcom County Rainbow Coalition and currently through the Whatcom's Jobs with Justice. On the con side, Dan Dunn, a human residing on Earth, is a Bellingham City resident and has a background in construction. So the initiative description is City of Bellingham Initiative number 2021-03 concerns recipients using city funds to discourage unionization efforts. This measure would prohibit any person who receives city funds from using these funds to discourage unionization efforts by that person's employees or any other employees. It would require recipients of city funds to segregate those funds, provide a safe harbor for non-managerial staff to engage in union protecting activities, provide for administrative investigations of complaints, establish private enforcement actions, change the city's contracting process, and allow the city to terminate contracts for violation of the prohibition. So now citizens representing the pro and con considerations will have 2 minutes to begin the discussion. And the opening statement will include this question. From your perspective, the answer to this question, from your perspective, what are 3 important considerations for voters in deciding how to vote on this proposition? Again, you'll have 2 minutes and we'll start with the pro statement. I'd like to welcome you, Betsy Pernato. Thank you.
Thank you to the League for hosting this forum today. The right of workers to join a union is enshrined in law in the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. However, when workers try to form a union, they often face a variety of legal and illegal intimidation tactics by employers. These include heavy-handed mandatory anti-union meetings, threatening letters or emails, worker surveillance, threatening to close the business or to move the business if workers vote for a union, and firing union supporters. In supervised union elections in 2016 to 2017, employers were charged with violating federal law in 41.5% of all union campaigns and charged with illegally firing employees in about 30% of these union elections. In the 30 years that I have supported worker solidarity in this community, I've witnessed at least 5 union busting campaigns in businesses when workers tried to form a union, and 5 in local nonprofits. And I'm sure this is an underestimate of the total number. The right to form a union is important because when workers join a union and collectively bargain, their wages, benefits, and working conditions improve. Collective bargaining reduces income inequality. It's important to vote for these initiatives because this initiative creates a more level playing field for workers, allowing them to have a voice in their workplaces to improve their wages and working conditions. For employers who don't engage in anti-union campaigns, it creates no administrative requirements. Second, if companies or organizations which receive Bellingham City monies use these funds to fight unionization, we are in effect subsidizing anti-union efforts as a community and possibly facilitating illegal union busting activities. And lastly, People First Bellingham Initiative 3 will be good for our community by helping to reduce inequality by allowing workers who choose to unionize to more easily do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the con side, please. I will read you the question again if you like. From your perspective, what are 3 important considerations for voters in deciding how to vote on this proposition, and your opening statement?
Thank you, Laura. Can you hear me okay?
Good.
Sweet. My opposition to Initiative 3 is not about unions or the rights for workers to organize. Those values are enshrined in federal law and deserve to be vigorously upheld. Instead, my concern is that this initiative, as written, fails to achieve its goal and creates negative unintended consequences that potentially affect every person in Bellingham. The goal for the initiative seems to be to protect workers' right to organize. The initiative could have followed established practices and legally sound models to protect workers' rights, but it does not. Labor neutrality agreements between government and a contractor are found in many places, but this is not an initiative to require labor neutrality agreements. Instead, this initiative requires every person or business who exchanges money, goods, or services with the city to set up an accounting system to track how the money is spent and to segregate funds. The city is then obligated to look at how everyone spends their money and make a determination whether it is used for any activity involving unions. Any person can be sued for any perceived violation of this initiative. It applies not just to businesses, but to every citizen employee, every social service agency, and every nonprofit that the city supports. It also applies to everyone who receives services from the city. That's what the initiative literally says. It's a huge burden, and it makes no sense that people who receive services from the city, such as water and sewer, have to track money that was never given to them. The proponents also seem to fundamentally misunderstand how money works. They think that when you pay someone else, the money is still yours and you can control how they use it. Although I'm not a lawyer, it is my understanding that once you pay someone, it's their money, not yours. The same is true when the city pays for things. The government cannot take away your choice to do what you want with your money after it's paid to you. Keeping in mind that labor neutrality agreement is a voluntary, it's part of a contract. No one is forcing companies to accept a government contract. That's why those agreements can work. This initiative fails to achieve its goal and creates negative unintended consequences that potentially affect every person in Bellingham. Please vote no on Initiative 3.
Thank you. So there are 3 general questions next. The speakers will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to the questions. A timer will signal, well, we will keep our eyes out for when the 15 seconds remain and when time is up. Who in our community will be helped if this legislation passes? It's the first general question. Going to the pro side, please.
Believe that workers who choose to join a union will be helped because companies that are receiving city funding will not be able to stop those unionization efforts or not have contracts with the city. I don't know how many workers are involved in those efforts, but I think that when employers have anti-union campaigns, it has a very chilling effect on those campaigns. The success rate of those campaigns goes down from about 50% to about 38%. That's from studies that have been done in the past. I'm not sure how much that applies now, but I think that it could it creates a message for workers that the city is not going to use our public resources to fund anti-worker campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. And Dan, on your comment on who in our community will be helped if this legislation passes.
Large contractors will be helped. Small contractors and entities who can't afford to hire accountants and to segregate money will most likely stop doing business with the city. When there's a smaller supply of labor or people willing to work with the city, then that means that the folks who are larger and who have the physical and financial ability to deal with different regulations have more opportunity to bid for those jobs and win those jobs. So at the end of the day, for this one, the folks who be helped are large contractors. The folks who be hurt is anybody who does business with the city, and especially small contractors, nonprofits, and individuals, anybody who does goods, services, or money with the city.
Thank you. The next question is, who will be harmed by passing this legislation? And we can start again with the pro side, please, Betty.
I would argue that employers that don't engage in anti-union activities will not be harmed. And in fact, even if employers choose to engage in anti-union activities, yes, they are forced to segregate city funding. But my question is, I'm going to reverse it, is that would you appreciate it if we use city funding to support workers organizing? City funding, public funding should be neutral. We should not support one side or another. And I think it's a responsible use of public funds not to allow companies that are fighting unions to receive those funds or to require that they segregate those funds. I don't honestly feel like anyone's going to be hurt. I feel like companies will have to do some segregation of funds and keep better track of funds if they're getting public funds and choose to fight unions. But if they don't choose to, there's no obligations incumbent upon them. Thank you.
Thank you. And so then on the con side, who will be harmed by passing this legislation?
So something I realized after I wrote the con argument that was published in the voter's guide was that the full text of the initiative is not in the voter's guide. There's a summary there, but it doesn't say all the details. It's just a very short summary. So I wanted to, one, encourage anybody who's listening to please read the full text of the initiative so you can be more informed about what the actual language is. You can find that on the People's First Initiative website. The text is there, and it's a little more difficult to find, but the official approved version is in a city council resolution that was passed on, I believe, Monday, where the city council came out, passed a resolution against all four of these initiatives. So the text is there, the official approved text, you can find that. So in order to say who is affected by this, from the definition in the initiative, it's under section 2, item 1, and that means any individual, government agency or entity, corporation, unincorporated association, partnership, or other legal entity. The term receive city funds means to receive city funds in any form. Direct payment also includes receipt by a contractor of payments for any portion of a contract. And city funds, I'll probably talk about this more in the next question, means any money drawn in and the goods or services. So I'll wrap it up there, but I do want to go over in more detail the exact language of the initiative.
Okay. So we have some questions that have been gathered from the community via the League's website and also from the chat. Here, the Q&A box here on Zoom, and I'm just going to pull them up. The questions are, we'll have time for up to 4 questions, and maybe even potentially 5 if another one comes in, with each side having 1.5 minutes to respond. So we'll start with, each of these initiatives are dealing with complex and challenging issues facing our community. Describe how you collaborated with community partners to craft the initiative or to craft the response to the initiative in order to understand the impact to our community. And we'll begin with the pro side, please.
Thank you. The initiative was crafted by a group of workers, community members, a union organizer, and they were submitted to each of the organizations that later endorsed the initiative before they were submitted to the city.
Thank you. And the con side.
Yeah, this was actually going to be my closing statement, but this is a good time to talk about it. From my perspective, the best policy comes when you talk with everybody who might potentially be impacted by that policy. So I do some work in housing policy. I like to talk to people who live in houses, people who are neighbors of houses, people who build houses, people in government who deal with houses, people who hate houses, people who love houses. I want to get all the information from all the different people, and that helps me make a better decision. And so when I express an opinion, I can say, you know what, I've listened to all the sides of the issues. My perspective is this, and that's why I'm advocating for this position. I think when you write an initiative and all you're asking is the people who endorse that initiative, you're missing out on half the people who are going to be affected by this initiative. So for me, I would encourage the folks who write these initiatives in the future to reach out to all sides of the issue and to create an initiative that brings in all the different perspectives. So it's not just the folks who are endorsing the initiative. I think that creates better policy overall.
Thank you. So starting with Betsy, what challenges do you foresee in implementing and monitoring this legislation?
I think that one of the things that will be very important is that workers are made aware of the legislation. I don't think that there are very many union organizing campaigns in which employers are not resistant in one form or another. They may not always fire workers or take extreme actions, but it's not infrequent that they hire union busting law firms. And it's very intimidating for workers. There's a real power differential between workers and their employers. And I think that workers have to feel confident that if they report the abuses of employers, that those will be kept private with the city. And I think it's important that the city set up a good system so that reporting can take place and that they set up a good system for monitoring contracts. I don't think that if we had, when these initiatives were written, if we had included everybody who was going to be affected by them, that they would, we would have gotten a positive response for employers. As I said, it's pretty universal that employers will fight unionizing efforts by workers. They resent it. And they're not going to say this is a wonderful idea, but I think that this is one way to empower workers and to make it possible for them to have a voice in their workplace. Thank you.
Thank you. And the con side, please.
And I'm sorry, could you restate the question?
No problem. What challenges do you foresee in implementing and monitoring this legislation?
Heaps. So I think going back to the initiative text, for those of you who are following along at home, section 2, definitions, item 3, city funds. So this is the stuff we're talking about, means any money drawn from the city general fund or any special or trust fund in the forms of goods or services that are provided to any person. In terms of monitoring what that means, section 4, required segregation of city funds. For purposes of this section, each recipient of city funds, so that means literally any person or entity that receives money, goods, or services. So I get a water bill from the city, that includes me. Each recipient of city funds shall account for the city funds in accordance with the following. City funds designated by the city for use for or to reimburse a specific expenditure of the recipient shall be accounted for as being allocated to that expenditure. Item B, city funds that are not so designated shall be allocated on a pro rata basis to all expenditures of the recipient that support or are related to the purpose for which city funds are received. So every single entity, every single person, going back to the definition of person, means any individual, government agency or entity, corporation, unincorporated association, partnership, or legal entity. Anybody at all has to do those two things. That's going to be a nightmare.
Okay, thank you. So for the pro side, there's a question, are there specific cases that precipitated drafting this legislation? If so, please give an example.
I don't know if there are specific cases, but I think that people who worked on this initiative, I think we're all aware of campaigns where workers tried to unionize in our community and faced resistance from employers. And in some cases were fired for those. So I'm not going to name names of organizations or businesses, but I have seen many of those. And to be honest, some of those have been among the largest employers in this county. And so it's not an uncommon event for companies or nonprofits to fight worker unionization. And so that's why I think it's necessary that we have an initiative like this to prevent those organizations from using our public resources to squash the voices of workers when they choose to unionize. Thank you.
Thank you. For the con side, there's a question, in your view, will this legislation increase or decrease the supply of good wage jobs? Please explain.
Thank you. That's a good question. In my opinion, this would decrease the number of good paying jobs. My reason for that would be that when there's legislation that increases a potential risk. So if you own a business and you're like, wow, here's this thing, I might get sued for things I don't even know about. Somebody might say something, I might say the wrong word about a union. Now in this initiative, there's a private action. So the city has an obligation to look at me, and then a private citizen can sue me. I might choose not to be in Bellingham anymore. I might choose not to do any business with the city. To not be impacted by this initiative, you have to literally move out of the city and have no contact with Bellingham. So when you look at it from probably an employer's perspective, if this initiative passes, they might say, hey, I'm going to take these jobs that I have and I'm going to move to Ferndale or somewhere else, so I don't have to deal with these unknown liabilities. So generally, when you have companies moving out of a city, that generally decreases the supply of good paying jobs.
Thank you. And for both of you, please speak to how this initiative will be similar or different to the requirements that organizations receive state, county, or local funds required by law to pay prevailing wages and document that prevailing wages were paid to contractors and workers. So how would this initiative be similar or different to those requirements? And Betsy, let's start with you, please.
I think that it's somewhat different. I mean, basically, what this prevailing wages are a requirement when public funds are used on certain kinds of projects that companies must pay a prevailing wage. This is somewhat different. Basically, I feel like this is an initiative that creates a responsible use of our public funds. We are not allowing companies, we're saying we're not going to allow companies to use these monies to stop workers from unionizing, just as opponents of this initiative would probably not like it if we were to use public monies to support unionization. I don't see this as something that is going to create a loss of jobs. That's an argument that employers make when workers try to unionize, that any kind of regulations are going to be an impediment to their doing business. And quite honestly, there's lots of regulations and businesses learn to work with those regulations. And I think it makes it a better community when we have a more transparent use of our public funding. Thank you.
Laura, I think you're muted.
How does that happen? Please speak to how this initiative will be similar or different, and on the con side, to the requirement that organizations receive state, county, or local funds. And those organizations are required by law to pay prevailing wages and document that prevailing wages were paid to contractors and workers.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Betsy. This initiative has nothing to do with that. So prevailing wage is administered by the Department of Labor and Industry. If you type in P&W, L&I, you'll see a list of wages broken down by journeyman or apprentice rates for probably 50 different trades, and they're different for each county. So they generally relate to construction. So when a company gets a contract where prevailing wages are required, then whether or not that company is union or not union, that company is required to pay their employees at least a certain amount. There's a dollar amount, and there's also benefit amounts and holiday requirements. So you're required to pay that. So whether I pay and that's a floor, so you can pay your people more, but not less. Those are voluntary requirements. I can choose to engage in those contracts. I can choose not to. I understand the costs and benefits. There's some reporting requirements. There's some paperwork requirements. Obviously, there's some pay and benefit requirements. And I can choose to engage in that, or I can choose not to. The difference with this initiative is that every single person who does goods, services, or money with the city, whether they want to or not, is now going to be subject to this requirement, which is kind of broad and unknown, and will be subject to lawsuits as well. And I think that uncertainty is really what impacts this initiative. I'm sorry, Laura, you're muted again.
Thanks for checking me. I appreciate you, Dan. So the next question is specific to a part of the language. In section 4, part 2, it says, quote, segregate its activities that are city funded from any of the recipient's activities that involve discouragement of unionization, end quote. The question is, does this mean that if an employer does not engage in activities that discourage unionization, are exempt from the financial segregation requirements? I'm going to read that again. Does this mean that if an employer does not engage in activities that discourage unionization, are they exempt from the financial segregation requirements? And we'll start with the pro.
I would say this is a legal question, and I am not a lawyer, but I guess I would interpret it myself to say that if a company is not engaging in union busting, that they would not have to segregate their funds and set up a special administrative system. Thank you.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, so I would look for the definition in the initiative of what union busting is, and they define it under section 3, item 2, and there's 4 items there. So if an entity or person or entity is accused of violating any of these 4 items, then potentially they could go back and say, oh, well, you should have segregated your money. You know, you should have known that beforehand. And like Betsy, I'm not a lawyer, so I would leave this up to the courts to figure it out. As a side note, I'm sure that if this initiative goes forward, it'll be challenged in the courts. That'll be an issue for the city to deal with. And I think one question to answer is, do we want to spend our money on fighting initiatives in court for a long time, or do we want to find a different way to do it, like with the labor neutrality agreement? So anyways, the use of city funds shall be deemed for the purpose of discouraging unionization if it directly or indirectly supports or is in furtherance of, and that language is extremely broad, right? So to support or make it furtherance is very like, I don't even know what that means. It could be anything. Communication of any, I'm just going to summarize these things. Communication in any form that advocates or directly or by implication suggests employees should vote against, hiring or consulting any legal counsel, holding any kinds of meetings, planning or conducting activities by an employer or supervisor to deter the activities of a labor organization. We could probably talk for 2 hours about that definition alone, but if you can read the initiative, look at those things, and understand that this is written so broadly that anything, anybody, any person is subject to this initiative.
Thank you. That was the last of the questions that we have received. And so now we will invite you to make a closing statement of not more than 2 minutes each, beginning with the pro side, please.
Thank you, Laura. People First Bellingham Initiative 3 is important because it bans the use of public funds to fight workers' efforts to struggle for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. It sends a message to workers that the city of Bellingham does not use our public resources to support anti-union campaigns. And the passage of this initiative can be part of an overall strategy by which Bellingham works to reduce inequality in our community. Please vote for People First Bellingham Initiative 3. Thank you.
And Dan, thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so my closure was going to be when you make initiatives, please talk to everybody on all sides of the issues. I think you'll get a better outcome. Even employers you might think are anti-union want to come to the table. We all live here in the same city, and we're all subject to the same rules. But I think I also want to point out that a lot of the concern about union busting is already illegal under federal law. So if you're an employee, if you tell somebody they shouldn't join a union, that's a federal law that you're breaking. If you tell somebody you're going to fire them if they join a union, that's a federal law you're breaking. If you tell them you're going to pay them more or less because they're going to join a union or not join a union, that's a federal law you're breaking. We can debate about whether those laws have teeth, whether they should be enforced in different ways. That's great. That would be an issue to, bring to the state level and really the federal level. I think those laws should have teeth. I think it's important that workers do have the right to union and to organize. I think unions go back a long ways and have provided a lot of good to the whole country. But I think with this initiative, it doesn't have anything to do with that or with those laws or supporting those laws. It has good intention, but it just makes life really, really difficult, and it doesn't achieve the goals that it set out to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate both of you for being here and representing both sides. Dan in particular came in at the last minute saying somebody at least should represent the other side, and the spirit of debate and civic engagement. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Laura Ridenour. I'm the moderator for this forum, and we are going to be discussing the initiative concerning employee rights for hourly wage employees and gig workers. Here's how this initiative resolution will be conducted. Our community agreements, while we're all together, are to listen first to understand, respect each other's perspectives and experiences, and to ask clear questions. If you're watching the recording and you have questions, please follow up with the sponsors of the initiative with your questions. So the pro side will speak first for the opening and closing statement. Each side will have 2 minutes to begin the discussion with an opening statement. Both sides will be asked to respond to questions aimed to help voters understand the issues behind each of the initiative measures and the impact of passing the initiative. Speakers will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to questions. To help you track your time, our timer counter shows purple as it's counting down, and it will turn yellow when 15 seconds remain. Speakers, don't forget to turn your timer on your side, please. When it turns red, the time is up. We ask that panelists will be respectful of the time allocated. Each side will have an opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement. The public chat feature is turned off. And for those of you who are joining us virtually live right now, you can type questions to the panelists into the Q&A box, and we invite those questions. A selection of these questions will be asked at the end of the discussion. So welcome, speakers for and against. We're so glad you're here to talk about these important policy decisions. We have Seth Mangold, Sage Jones, Carrie Longergan Drake, excuse me. I'm going to do that again. Carrie Longergan Drake. Please correct me when we are speaking. And Chelsea Acton. And we will start the discussion with the pro. I'm going to read you the bios of all of our speakers, and then we'll get started. Seth Mangold has been a worker, political organizer, and renter in Bellingham for nearly a decade. He's been a part of People's First Bellingham since its conception, from the drafting to coalition building to signature gathering and voter turnout activities. Welcome, Seth. Sage Jones is a Bellingham renter whose community work focuses on municipalism, housing, and relational organizing with a Whatcom DSA. She believes Initiative 1 is an important step for housing justice in Bellingham. Excuse me, that was left over from the first forum discussion. And Carrie Longergan Drake is a native of the Northwest and started working in the hospitality industry as a young teenager. Lombardi's Italian Restaurants is a family-owned business that was founded in Seattle in 1987. Carrie currently serves on the board of the Washington Hospitality Association and HopeWorks. Chelsea Acton lives in Ferndale with her husband, Brett, and their 5 children. Together, they own Bellingham Grocery Outlet and is a second-generation small business owners. So the City of Bellingham Initiative number 21-04 concerns employee rights for hourly wage employees and gig workers. This measure would require certain employers to pay their employees a hazard pay supplement of $4 per hour during a declared state of emergency. It would require employers to provide good faith estimates of weekly hours to new employees upon hire, and require employers to provide work schedules to hourly wage employees 2 weeks in advance, and require advance notice of any schedule changes, and require employers to compensate employees for changing their work schedules without sufficient notice, and prohibit adverse actions by employers. So we'll start with an opening statement. Citizens representing the pro and con considerations will have 2 minutes to begin the discussion. In your opening statement, please include the answer to the question, what are 3 important considerations for voters in deciding how to vote on this proposition? And we'll start with the pro statement, please.
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity to bring this initiative and speak to it today. As somebody who's worked in public-facing customer service for over a decade, it's really a privilege to bring this worker-centered initiative to the voters of Bellingham. Initiative 4 provides for fair treatment of hourly wage employees and gig workers by creating a procedure for advance notice to their schedules and for hazard pay during states of emergency. So the 3 considerations. First, all workers deserve regularity and predictability in their schedules. Low-income workers are particularly likely to have uncertain schedules, making it difficult to coordinate other aspects of their life, such as childcare and schooling. Businesses too can benefit from a more rational scheduling process that creates greater predictability, leading to better employee performance and retention. Second, most workers in face-to-face jobs in Bellingham will be compensated for additional risks they face when they must work during a state of emergency. For example, low-wage workers have disproportionately worked in face-to-face jobs throughout this pandemic. Although there are a few exceptions, the vast majority of these workers have not been compensated for keeping our city running during the pandemic. This initiative makes sure that when workers face additional risks that are out of the norm of their job, they're compensated fairly. Finally, Bellingham as a whole benefits when low-wage workers are paid more. To put it bluntly, people who make less money have more immediate needs. They are therefore more likely to put the money they make back into the local economy, while middle and upper income residents are more likely to save or invest their additional income. This additional spending provides a boost to the entire economy.
Thank you. And for the con side, please make your opening statement and include the question, what are 3 important considerations for voters in deciding how to vote on this proposition?
Hi, this is Carrie Lonergan-Drakey. I'm going to be taking this question. I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. Chelsea and I really appreciate the opportunity. Higher costs on local small businesses and nonprofits will be passed on to everyone in the community at a time when many of us are reeling from the increased costs of gas, housing, groceries, childcare, and utilities. The Bellingham City Council understands the financial harm that will inevitably be brought to the community at large if $4 an hour hazard pay and restrictive scheduling passes, which is why the council unanimously opposes I-4. This initiative cannot be amended for 2 years by the council if passed. Workers will also be negatively impacted by fewer hours and layoffs due to unanticipated additional costs to their employers, which will be passed on to consumers, likely resulting in less revenue to their employer. Nonprofits are not exempt from this initiative as well, and the extra costs of I-4 could result in fewer staff members providing valuable services to clients. I-4 would be the last straw for many struggling small businesses and nonprofits that are attempting to survive the pandemic. Lastly, there is a disconnect between mandated $4 an hour hazard pay whenever an emergency is declared by state and local governments. Declared emergencies are used primarily to obtain federal dollars for recovery purposes and have little to do with actual risk to workers. For example, floods and fires in one part of Whatcom County do not put Bellingham workers at risk. The harm to small businesses, nonprofits, in the city of Bellingham from unbudgeted extra payroll costs would be massive. The city of Bellingham is projecting a potential $4 to $6 million budget deficit from the impacts of I-4. Potential cuts to library services and parks are being discussed by the city council. I-4 would harm the very people the initiative intends to help. We ask voters to reject I-4.
Thank you. So there are 3 questions next. Speakers will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to questions. The timer will signal when 15 seconds remain. Please keep your eye on the timer. And so beginning with the pro side, who in our community will be helped if this legislation passes?
Well, generally speaking, many workers and businesses and Bellingham as a whole will benefit from Initiative 4. A lot of misleading talking points that are used whenever workers fight for better wages and conditions on the job. We hear that hours may be reduced, services cut, or businesses may even be forced to close. However, the winners of the 2021 Nobel Prize in Economics study of market labor research showed that mandated wage increases do not affect employment levels. When workers have more money, they spend it creating more demand for goods and services. A rising tide raises all ships. Sage, do you have any input?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that when we talked to workers while gathering signatures for this initiative, they shared how impactful both the hazard pay and secure scheduling would be. Workers felt left out by the city council's hazard pay, which didn't, cover hazard pay for restaurant workers who are often working around people that are completely unmasked, or other workers that are working on site and risking their well-being during an emergency. And the secure scheduling part of this initiative was just like, people really resonated with that. People want reliability in their schedules.
Thank you. I'm being asked to be more strict with the timer stopping and asked to cut you off. So I will do my best to help you stop on time. Who will be harmed? Excuse me, I believe the con side now has a chance to answer the question, who in our community will be helped if this legislation passes?
Is this timed? Yeah, okay. So yes, I just echo what Carrie said. Thank you for having us here. We're really grateful for the opportunity. First off, I want to say that I do believe this initiative was written with very good intent. I truly do. I also believe that the way it was written, it needs more thoughtful collaboration from business owners and workers from all industries, not just workers. Business owners equally need to have a voice in this, because a lot of workers don't have the full understanding of what the running the business means and what that budget looks like. Legislation like this is not a one-size-fits-all. The unintended consequences are very concerning. The most damaging consequence of raising costs across all industries will harm everyone equally who lives in Bellingham and who shop in Bellingham. As I observe the customers that we serve in my store, Bellingham Grocery Outlet, I don't see how raising the price of all of our products in the store is going to help them in our community. And a $4 hazard pay increase is going to do just that. It's going to raise costs across all services in the entire community. I would appreciate an inclusive opportunity with community partners and council to write something of this magnitude before it is put into place, because as it is currently written, I don't believe it's going to help anyone. I think it's going to harm everyone.
Thank you. And so on that note, the next question is, who will be harmed by passing this legislation? Beginning with the pro side, please.
Yeah, like I said, we're hearing a lot of these misleading talking points. I feel the opposition is acting as though, these costs happen within a vacuum, but they're not calculating that their customers will also be getting paid more, most likely. But I want to point to who's funding the opposition campaign. That's who perceives will be taking harm from this. At the time of this forum, $180,000 has been put into the No on I-4 campaign. Only one of those contributions monetarily has been from Bellingham, making up less than 3% of their total. The vast majority of it comes from large corporate lobbies like the Washington Retail, Hospitality, and Restaurant Associations. They don't want to pay their workers a fair wage, and they want to have more control over their workers' lives and not giving them fair scheduling.
Thank you. And on the con side, please, who will be harmed if this legislation passes? You'll have one.
Yes, I'll take this one. The Bellingham community at large is going to be harmed by higher prices on goods and services at a time when prices on groceries, gas for our cars, childcare, retail goods, and restaurant meals are already rising rapidly. Small businesses and nonprofit workers will lose hours, opportunity, and potentially their jobs, as all employers will be faced with higher payroll costs that will have to be passed on to consumers and clients. Many small businesses are facing permanent closure. Hunger relief and shelter services may also face cutbacks, as nonprofits are not exempt from this initiative. What services should the city of Bellingham and Western Washington University cost? How much will Peace Health have to raise prices because of higher staffing costs?
Thank you. There's a balance of time. Chelsea, would you like to add anything?
As a small business owner, I would like to say that the flexibility and relationship that we have with our associates is very special and unique, and we do want flexible scheduling for them, and we do offer that for them. Flexible scheduling during a time right now where people are sick and need to have that flexibility. College students have tests. That flexibility is special, and it needs to be honored in a schedule, in a business owner, and an employer. And this initiative would effectively strip that.
Thank you. If this legislation fails to pass, what would be the outcome? Starting with the pro side, please. Oh, Seth, you're on mute.
Sorry. If this legislation fails to pass, the working class will continue to be at the whim of their employer when it comes to their schedule. And they'll continue to have to fight for hazardous pay when working in hazardous conditions each and every time a relevant state of emergency arises. I want to address that secure scheduling. It acts on an interactive process between employer and employee. It does not restrict and regulate how that is done, other than, in good faith estimate 2 weeks in advance. Additionally, all workers deserve this predictability. It doesn't negate any flexibility. And yeah, Sage, do you have any additional comments?
Let's see, what was the original question? I'm so sorry.
No problem. Who will be harmed by passing, excuse me, if this, are we on?
Yeah, okay, it's okay, I got it from here. So I think that we will see, temporary drops in profit, but as Seth mentioned earlier, the winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics just this year stated that when wages go up, employment doesn't go down, and that's because low-wage workers spend more money.
Thank you. If this legislation fails to pass, what will be the outcome? Did I skip over something here? I think we're supposed to go to the con side now.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start that. Okay.
Yes,
so if this legislation fails to pass, what will be the outcome? I believe there will be an opportunity to recreate legislation with council that will work for everyone in our community. Policies that hope to address the address the intended beneficiaries of the current legislation. We want the opportunity to work with community members in an inclusive process to build a healthy future for everyone. If this fails, local small businesses and nonprofits get to keep their doors open. They have already been struggling to stay open, and we should be working on helping them right now, not taking business away from them. We also get to keep supporting nonprofits and feeding the hungry and sheltering those in need. Parks and libraries will stay open. Access to resources for children who are in need will be able to have those resources now that those libraries will be supported, and parks will be open for families and children to play in. I know, like I said, I have 5 kids of my own, and we rely on those parks heavily for the growth of our children. Small businesses and nonprofits are the heart and body of Bellingham. If you remove the heart, the body will fail. And I believe that that's exactly what will happen. So.
Thank you. On the pro side, if this legislation fails to pass, what will be the outcome?
I've already answered that question.
Okay, thank you. I got lost in my script, and I wanted to make sure that I hadn't neglected to ask your side. Okay, so questions from the Zoom chat have been collected by Allison, a league representative, and anybody who submitted a question about this initiative to the league website. We have time for potentially up to 5 questions, as we are running a little bit ahead of time with our schedule. So we'll begin with each side having 1.5 minutes and to respond to the questions. The first question is the one that's been asked of the other initiatives. Each of these initiatives are dealing with complex and challenging issues facing our community. Describe how you collaborated with community partners in either crafting the initiative or in response to them in order to understand the impact to the community. We'll start with the pro side, please.
Yeah, Initiative 4 was written by workers for workers. Often low-wage workers' voices are not centered or even heard in any of these conversations around policy. So I feel like this is, a unique opportunity for workers' voices to be heard on a large citywide scale. The reason that these initiatives were brought forth in the first place is because of City Council's lack of action in protecting frontline workers. It wasn't until after vaccinations started rolling out that we saw a narrow hazard pay come forth to City Council and be passed by them. And I was a proud testifier in support of those initiatives, or that ordinance. So I think, often, business interests are very centered. I think we see that with their vote this past week. So this is workers realizing their power.
Thank you. And on the other side, each of these initiatives are dealing with complex and challenging issues facing our community. Describe how you collaborated with community partners in either crafting the initiative or in response to them in order to understand the impact to the community.
Carrie, I'll take this one.
Okay.
I would like to say that I was actually a really heavy part in crafting the initiative and ordinance for the first hazard pay that was written about, six months ago, and able to effectively write my business out of the ordinance because I was able to provide the documentation needed for the City Council to understand why a small business like mine truly could not absorb those costs, and they understood that. If you guys want to know more information about that, I'm willing to chat privately with you on that. Hazard pay is not just a $4 increase during the pandemic. This initiative is written to include all states of emergency. So there could be, did you guys know that we're actually in a state of emergency in 2020 before the pandemic even hit? So this initiative as written would include all states of emergency, not just in the pandemic. It would include the drought in Sumas at the beginning of 2020. It will include fires on the east side. It includes all of those. And because of this initiative, and it's not clearly defined to exclude that, this would affect businesses for the entirety of the year almost in Bellingham, if and when we are out of the pandemic. So that's the fear that comes from that $4 hazard pay, because it simply can't be absorbed, and we can't plan for that. I can't plan for a hazard pay to start in 3 months. I just simply can't.
Thank you. So the next question is, was there any type of economic assessment, impact assessment, or forecast conducted prior to writing this initiative? If so, what are your projections for the economic impact, including the number of people who would benefit, as well as the number of people who would be negatively affected?
We did not conduct a study on our own. This is a completely grassroots volunteer effort. So we've looked to, studies in other cities. These laws have precedence. We've seen secure scheduling laws pass in many other cities, Seattle, Philadelphia, hazard pay pass in those areas as well. So we look to those studies and see that the effects that they had, and it unanimously benefits workers and the community as a whole.
Thank you. Sage, do you have anything to add? The balance of time? Oh, sorry, the timer got turned off.
Okay, just go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to second what Seth said. This is a grassroots campaign. We looked at the workers that were left out, and we looked at legislation on secure scheduling from Seattle, and we spoke with thousands and thousands of workers in the signature gathering part of this campaign, none of which were coerced into signing to get this on the ballot. They all saw the merit in this. So in a way, that was a study of, who wants this in Bellingham.
Thank you. Can we have the timer for 2 minutes, just because we were not able to track the total when I offered the balance of time for the onside. Thank you. And so would you like me to reread the question?
Please.
Okay. Was there any type of economic impact assessment or forecast conducted? Or what are your projections for the economic impact, including the number of people who would benefit, as well as the number of people who would be negatively affected by this legislation?
I'll take this one. I was not even aware of this initiative until July. And I believe that we could have found a solution that would work for both employers and workers, that would be much more flexible than the current initiative that we have before us. I support predictive scheduling as long as there's reasonable accommodations for, or I support restrictive scheduling. I'm opposed to the penalties, and I'll say some of the punitive additional costs that employers would, like myself, would be impacted with. For example, if an employee calls out sick, when we call someone else to fill that shift, we would have to pay a premium to the employee that we're calling in to replace the sick worker. I mean, that's not reasonable. Also, our business is largely based around weather. We can't predict weather for 2 weeks. Now, we do write 2-week schedules, but we also understand that things change, weather changes, and we have to be able to adapt to that. And our employees understand that as well, and they're willing to work with us. Employers and employees need each other. One does not exist without the other. Chelsea, do you want to add anything?
Nailed it. I don't need to add anything.
Thank you. So the next question is, what is the enforcement mechanism for this initiative? Beginning with the pro side, please.
I'm glad this is asked because it highlights the limitations around citizen-led initiatives like ours. A citizen-led initiative isn't allowed to create a new tax or explicitly write budget line items. So we could not, create a new agency on our own. So the enforcement mechanism is the courts. And So this actually, kind of negates any sort of vague parts, particularly around hazard pay and states of emergency. This law doesn't exist in a vacuum. It works in conjunction with other laws, and our whereas clauses create clear intent of when when hazard pay is supposed to be paid out, and it's work that hazards that affect the work on site. So if a worker was to try to take an employer to court over not paying hazard pay over something like a drought or a bridge outage on the other side of the county, it would not affect, it would not apply to that employee receiving that and entitling them to hazard pay.
Thank you. And on the con side on this initiative, do you want to make any comments about the enforcement mechanism?
I would just like to add that it puts employers and employees in an uncomfortable spot with each other. You're pitting employees against your employers when we're already doing our best to create a healthy working condition for them, because there's no agency to mitigate this or help them out with this right now. I would also like to say that since March 1st of 2020, we've had over 550,000 interactions with customers and only 2 positive cases since March of 2020. So we are a healthy work environment. We are a safe work environment. We care. A majority of small businesses in Bellingham did actually, in fact, pay hazard pay to a portion of what they could afford. And hazard pays like this will, in the future really cause permanent minimum wage increases, and permanent minimum wage increases only means that costs continue to increase and the housing market increases and the construction to build those houses increases. So we're looking at an all around increase of living, and eventually we're going to be forcing some people out. So I would hate to be in a position where my associates are being pit against me for something that I don't have a whole lot of control or say of.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions coming in the Q&A, and so we have made the decision to extend this discussion. Just to let you know, there are more questions coming. Does that all work for you? Okay, so the next question is, would this ordinance apply to every employer in the city, regardless of the size of business? And we'll just continue to toggle back.
You want to break, Seth?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so there is a small business carve out in Initiative 4 that limits the hazard pay to 14 days per year for any rolling 12-month period. And as far as the secure scheduling goes, we believe that all workers, regardless of business size, deserve secure scheduling. We did like a frequently asked questions, which we'll release soon, which includes, what if I don't want a set schedule? And I'm just going to read off our answer for that. Section 2-11 states that discussions between the employer and the employee around scheduling may include the proposal of alternatives by the employee and the employer. All workers deserve predictability in their scheduling, but if an employee would prefer to work a changing schedule, they can. And I just want to stress, like, this is for on-site workers. I'm hearing like a lot of concerns about nonprofits, and a lot of nonprofits shifted, whatever work could be done remotely during the pandemic in order to help their workers stay safe. And we hope that this hazard pay for on-site workers would encourage more of this behavior.
Thank you. And on the other side, what's your perspective on how might this initiative and the hazard pay supplement affect, excuse me, I'm reading the next one. How would this ordinance apply to every employer in the city, regardless of the size of the business?
I just want to add in there that it's for 30. It's all employers with 30 or less employees get that exemption. There are still a lot of small businesses and nonprofits in Bellingham who have, I mean, I don't know for sure, that have less than 30 employees and still asking for a hazard pay increase of $4 per hour for 2 weeks in a year is difficult. That's a lot of money and really, really hard to plan for and budget for. 14 days is still a lot for those small businesses to have to raise. And so my that's a big concern for me. Carrie?
Yeah, to answer the question very simply, yes, this initiative does apply to all employers. So school districts, the city of Bellingham, nonprofits, large and small, all businesses will be subject to this initiative.
Thank you. And the next question is, how might this initiative and the hazard pay supplement affect the Bellingham School District and their ability to serve the community's children? And I believe that would be to the pro side, since you are one of the initiators of the language in this initiative.
That's a great question. So, like I've said earlier, the majority of Bellingham workers could be entitled to this pay, including those who work in the school district, and they should be. Though this is for hourly workers, and a lot of these kind of more professional white collar jobs are salaried. Additionally, as workers have more money to spend, they're spending it, which on goods and services that to incur a local, Bellingham city sales tax. So the city will be generating more money in that way as well to help fund those, the school district and, any other government agency.
Thank you. And as this is not specifically allocated for the con side, I would still offer you the comment if you have gained any community perspective on the specific to the school district and their ability to serve the community.
My reading of the initiative is that this does not apply to just hourly workers. It applies to all workers, regardless of how they're paid, salary or hourly. Therefore, it is going to be impacting school districts.
Yes, per city council, the hazard pay would be paid to salary workers too.
Thank you.
Not just hourly, just salary. And workers aren't spending more if prices around the entire community are increasing. So as the minimum wage goes up, the cost of everything goes up. So you're not making more or spending more because it's equaling out by the raise in costs of everything else going up around you.
I have a related question so we can continue this conversation. The question is, this initiative focuses on hazard pay across the board as a $4 increase. Why or why not should the focus instead be on a minimum wage plus $4 to target low-income essential workers? That would be on the pro side.
I'm certainly not against raising the minimum wage as well. And I think it's important to do so. Luckily in Washington State, we've been seeing regular increases, but those are barely maintenance. If you compare, 1970s minimum wages to today, counting for inflation, it should be, over $20. And even with this hazard pay and Washington's high minimum wage, it still doesn't make that mark. So, I don't think that these are, costs that are too high in terms of labor. Again, people are going to be spending that money immediately once they have it. They have those immediate needs, and that is for those goods and services.
I'll take the last 30 seconds if that's okay. So we did this in during the pandemic. And that's because we saw businesses making choices to put their workers at risk when maybe they could have gone remote earlier. And we hope that hazard pay will encourage employers to put the safety of their workers first.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question. The initiative focuses on hazard pay across the board as a $4 increase. Why or why not should the focus instead be a minimum wage plus $4 to target low wage essential workers?
I want to address the misconception here that this initiative is only about $4 an hour hazard pay. There's also the restrictive scheduling piece that needs attention. And I addressed that earlier in the impact of the restrictive scheduling, how that will impact my business. Think about how this is going to impact the construction industry, which is heavily dependent on weather, nonprofits as well. Excuse me. So the way this initiative is written is the scheduling piece is very inflexible, and there are significant penalties to employers when schedules need to be changed for a variety of business reasons or weather reasons. So I want folks to really think about, how fair is it that employers are going to have to pay more to bring in an employee to cover for another employee who calls out sick? I mean, we do support employees, having a set schedule, and we do that as much as we can. But the way this initiative is adding extra costs to employers in a way that is not reasonable, that's what I oppose.
Thank you. So, what is the enforcement mechanism for this initiative?
I've already answered that question as well.
Thank you. Somehow it got bumped down on my list here. I think all these questions coming in have flooded things. Okay. Is anyone aware of if the city has provided cost estimates for this mandatory increase in wages? Has there been a policy analysis for wages for city employees?
Can you repeat that for me? I'm sorry.
Yes. Has there been a policy analysis by the city providing cost estimates for this mandatory increase in wages for city employees? Has the city provided any cost estimates?
Not at this point.
Thank you.
Actually, that's not true. My understanding is that the city council is estimating a $4 to $6 million increase in payroll costs if this initiative passed, regarding the hazard pay piece and the additional costs to the city around the scheduling restrictions.
That's accurate. Yes, she's right.
Thank you.
Just to, I don't know.
I just want to confirm the balance of time. Would you like any more time on this question on the con side?
No, I think, no.
Great, thank you. Okay, pro side, please respond.
Sorry to jump time. Yeah, so we did see, the brief staff memo with those numbers. We don't know if that is what continuity of state of emergency that is factoring in. So yeah, we're not sure the details, but they have released that initial number that Carrie and Chelsea mentioned.
Okay, so I have one more question, and then we will move to your closing statement. How many days a year do we expect the hazard pay premium to be in effect? Will the hazard pay section be interpreted as applying to all states of emergency and be in effect nearly always, or will it only apply narrowly? And let's start with the pro side, please.
Yeah, as I said earlier, our whereas clauses at the beginning of the initiative provide that clear intent on when this applies. It applies to on-site workers who cannot work remotely, who are frontline. We don't anticipate it to, be in effect all the time. But it's hard to say, these it is unpredictable, but no matter what, our workers, deserve hazardous pay for hazardous conditions. And again, I want to highlight the exemption for the 14 days for small businesses.
Just to jump in, yeah, I mean, that's the thing about the state of the world these days, right? Like we don't know what hazardous conditions workers will have to face. But we do know that typically legislation, if left to solve every hazard one by one, moves very slowly. And we want to protect workers during hazards that come up in their workplaces preemptively.
Thank you. And the con side, would you like me to read it again?
Go ahead.
Okay. How many days a year do we expect the hazard pay premium to be in effect? Will the hazard pay section be interpreted as applying to all states of emergency and be in effect nearly always, or will it only apply narrowly?
The way this initiative is worded is it's very vague. So it's hard to really know how many days that the hazard pay piece could be in effect. And also the states of emergency that could be declared that would necessitate hazard pay is open to interpretation as well. So as I had said earlier, let's say there's a fire in the eastern part of the county that has no impact on workers in Bellingham. This initiative could be interpreted to require businesses to pay their workers an additional $4 an hour when there is no risk to them whatsoever. So the initiative is poorly worded, in my opinion.
Yes, exactly what Carrie said. And just a reminder that City Council can't change that wording or do anything about this legislation for another 2 years. So it's set as is written, and as is written, according to the 2020 year, we're looking, it's at least half the year that the county could be under a hazard pay ordinance. And
Thank you. Oh, at this time, I'd like to invite you to make a closing statement. Each side will present closing statements of not more than 2 minutes each, beginning with the pro side.
Again, thank you so much for providing this opportunity, League of Women Voters. You make our democracy thrive. And I do appreciate our opponents' acknowledgement that this, was written with the best intentions, but that's not just a warm, fuzzy feeling. The whereas clauses provide that clear intent that help the city and the courts, who will, have the obligation to apply this, as with all laws, make sure that intent is brought out. I want to take the rest of my time to speak directly to the low-wage workers of Bellingham. Right now, all across the country, we're seeing workers fight for better wages, benefits, and working conditions, often in a defensive position, protecting the gains that they've made over decades. I hope images of these picket lines and workers gathering signatures, knocking on doors, and participating in forums just like this one help shows you the collective power you have. You deserve the value you create. We can take a step forward to that end together when we vote yes on Initiative 4.
Thank you. Sage, will you be joining in the closing statement?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate a thank you for your time, and that I also really appreciate Seth bringing up like that this has been an amazing experience, gathering these signatures and talking to workers. And we really are all in this together. I'm looking forward to November.
Thank you. On the con side on this initiative, please make your closing statement.
Okay, thank you. Again, lots of thanks to go around this table. We're really grateful for your time and hope that we touch many of your hearts as we all have the opportunity to speak with you. So as of last week, there are at least 110 small businesses who oppose this initiative, not banks, not corporate businesses, but small businesses and nonprofits alike. As you know now, the Bellingham City Council has unanimously opposed all 4 of the initiatives due to significant unintended legal and policy consequences anticipated for the city, for the community members, for the local business community. If this passes, again, City Council cannot make changes for 2 years after passing. The opportunity to smooth out the edges is passed. Especially we as a small business community and nonprofit community, asking for that opportunity now. We would love that opportunity to revisit this and recreate something in an all-inclusive way for the growth and the future of Bellingham. So we are asking for that opportunity by encouraging you to please vote no.
Thank you. Carrie, would you like to also join?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Chelsea said. Thank you for hosting this. I think this is very valuable, and I appreciate hearing the other side. As I stated earlier, employers and employees exist together. We are not successful without one another. And we urge voters to vote no on this initiative so that we can come together with the City Council, with all stakeholders, getting our employees involved to find a solution that truly does add worker protections without unduly harming all employers, the nonprofit community, and the community at large. Thanks again for having us.
Thank you, everyone, for participating and all of your voices. Thank you for listening and watching. I particularly want to mention that the Spanish recording was made simultaneously and will be available on the Whatcom Bellingham Women's League of Women Voters website. Thank you, speakers, for being active citizens and help in giving people voice to the issues related to these initiatives and helping us make more informed choices with our vote. And so, dear voters, I ask you and citizens of Bellingham, should one or all of these measures be enacted into law? The polling happens at the voting box and in the mailbox. Thank you, everyone.